Hey, welcome back. So I've been doing these once a week, but I'm going to start doing these once or twice a week now that the baseball season for me is over. Shout out to the Seattle Mariners and their fan base for their big win against my beloved Toronto Blue Jays. Good luck going forward. I had something I'd been wanting to do for years was go see the Blue Jays play in Seattle because all those Seattle fans, they know how many Canadians come down and just take over the place. And I had a chance to do that finally this year, and it was amazing. Seattle, beautiful city. The people, so nice. Stadium, fantastic. I loved the Mariners fans. And the man with the black mask calling me a fascist was surprisingly gentle. So all in all, not a bad trip. But anyhow, good luck Mariners. And but yeah, now that baseball season's over, and as an avid baseball fan, being a fan is basically a part-time job. I've got a lot more free time on my hands. So here's another video. Last video, I described how I transitioned from being a moderate but ardent progressive and feminist to being a moderate but ardent person who is center-right, and while still being very much an egalitarian and like a civil libertarian, I am now quite anti-feminist. I can talk about that in another video if anyone wants. But anyhow, I'll leave it at that. But just to be clear, doesn't mean that I don't believe in equal rights. Like many people, I was very disturbed by what had been happening in the left starting around 2012 or so, maybe a little earlier, though it took me a little longer to notice it perhaps. But really in 2013, I did not like the over-the-top identity politics in which a person's credibility was largely based on their demographics and not on what they were saying. And where people were often told to shut up if they were right and male. Was not a fan of that at all. I also didn't like the humorlessness. Like, the left used to be a place full of humor. Like the best comedians, like George Carlin, Louis, most of them were on the left. Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, all that kind of stuff. Most of them were on the left. And you had the cultural scolds back then on the right, like the far Christian right, things like that. But it's like that humorlessness has taken over the left. The stuff that we used to associate with the religious right, like won't somebody please think of the children kind of mentalities, has taken over the left to the point where it's like everything is super serious. Like you can't make a joke about anyone but a straight white male. And every argument that is made that opposes any social justice narrative is treated as evidence of either ignorance, stupidity, or just flat out evil. So there's this great intolerance of dissent on social justice issues, and often the attribution of the worst possible motives to those who have anything to say against a social justice idea. There's this recurring phenomena wherein people who spoke against the social justice movement ideas would have their speaking events shut down, bomb threats called in, like loud disruptions so the speaker couldn't be heard, doors blocked so people could not enter, and so on. Things like this, like calls to have events canceled and all that kind of stuff. This was all happening on the left towards people that were contradicting the left. Like, if anyone can point to an example in the last 10 years of someone, of a right-wing individual or group going in and banging pots and pans so people couldn't hear a left-wing speaker, or calling in bomb threats so the event wouldn't be had, or things like that, let me know, because I can't think of any of them. But though that is not to say that not everyone on the left is doing this. In fact, it's only a very, 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 very small minority. So totally granted. And then there was the substantial supplanting of economic populism with identity politics. So those are some of the reasons that I got very disenchanted with the left and left the left. But I was far from the only one who was disillusioned by what I was seeing. There were many moderate liberals, libertarians, classical liberals, who were also becoming profoundly disillusioned, having a great deal of difficulty believing that they were seeing and hearing what they were seeing and hearing. There were some YouTube personalities that said what millions were thinking. Two of them were Tim Pool and Dave Rubin. And each of these two had substantial left/progressive cred. Tim Pool had made a name for himself primarily through his fair coverage of Occupy Wall Street. And Dave Rubin had been a host of the very progressive Young Turks for years. They each held the majority of progressive positions, and any right winger at the time would have called them both lefties, and so would any non-extreme lefty. They would totally agree. So when they started speaking out, and people like them, others like, Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad, people like that, when they started speaking out about the excesses of the left, they garnered substantial audiences from disaffected liberals and moderates, as well as people on the right who either enjoyed watching the left implode and or were simply wanting to hear the perspective of people on the inside who have come to see how crazy things had gotten. It was just interesting to see, I'm sure, for many of them. And I'm sure they had the popcorn out. Likewise, many of these same disaffected liberals started watching more right-wing media, like Ben Shapiro, Stephen Crowder, and the like. And the reason being is that, with some exceptions, like Tim Pool, Dave Rubin, and Carl Benjamin, who were kind of moderate left, who were calling out the crazy on the left, it was these right-wing voices that were also calling out the same crazy that us disaffected liberals were seeing, but that many people in our community were not talking about because, for the reasons I kind of specified in the last video. And it was very easy to view Tim Pool and Dave Rubin as having absolutely impeccable integrity. Their entire launch point was as disaffected liberals who were disillusioned with what was happening to the left and were trying to help right the ship, so to speak, no pun intended. So you would frequently see them praising things that conservatives did and criticizing things that people on the left did. And this came off to me, and a lot of people, I think, as being just total integrity. It looked like, hey, they're willing to commend people on the other side when they do good and criticize people on their own side when they did bad. And they did this a lot. And that really is like how much more can you ask for someone if you want integrity from them? Is to call out the successes of the other side and the moral failures on their own side. And they never ran out of things to talk about because there was constantly someone on the left, whether it be a politician or a speaker or just some college student at a Ben Shapiro event, who would do something that would be humiliating. And likewise, there would always be something you could show of like a right-wing personality, owning a lib and so forth. And so they never ran out of material. But nevertheless, it was easy to miss how one-sided they were increasingly becoming. Because, it's kind of like when you start watching Breaking Bad, you start off that the last time you've seen Bryan Cranston was as this hapless, good-natured father in Malcolm in the Middle. And that's pretty much what he starts off as in Breaking Bad. And then as the show goes on, he becomes progressively more bad. But it takes a while for you to realize how bad he's becoming and how quickly he's becoming bad because you're so busy being sympathetic to him because of the starting point at which he launched off at. And that was similarly easy to do with Pool and Rubin because you come in just being like, oh yeah, these are disaffected liberals who are trying to just point out the crazy on their own side and hopefully salvage things. And it's easy to not realize that they're shifting, and they're shifting faster than you think. It was also extremely easy to not recognize that so many of Tim Pool's video titles were obvious clickbait. Things like Democrats in panic mode, things like that. For a long time, I didn't take that as clickbait. I took that as an accurate depiction of what Tim Pool was observing. And because after all, the left was fractured between, there's the identity politics left, there's the economic populist left, there's the moderate left, there's the establishment left, etc. So, there was a lot of infighting and whatnot. So that's something to panic about. Pre-COVID, Trump was looking like he was going to cruise to re-election, with the economy doing so well, no new wars, all that kind of stuff. So the Democrats definitely had a lot to panic about. They also didn't have any budding young stars or good people that they could put forward as candidates. That's why we got stuck with people like Biden and Kamala Harris. And so they had a lot to be panicked about. But after a while, me and my best friend, we pretty much started noticing roughly at the same time, independently, simultaneously, we started feeling having a funny feeling about Tim Pool. We started feeling how many times can we hear about the Dems being in panic mode? And Like it really does seem like he doesn't really criticize Trump or the Republicans very much at all. Like he'll criticize some old school Republicans like that are totally establishment, like Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell and so forth. But he really wouldn't criticize Trump. Like he would pretend to. He would he would make mild, tepid criticisms, like referring to his character flaws and whatnot. But it's like what happened because I started becoming like feeling iffy about him. I started saying, okay, I'm gonna start watching some like sources on the left just to balance myself out because I started having a feeling like maybe I'm not as balanced as I thought I was. I thought I was balanced because I thought I had this center left person who was willing to like commend the right when it made sense and criticize the left when it made sense. And so I figured he was providing me with fantastic balance. But once I doubted that, I started watching videos regularly by people like Kyle Kalinske, Jimmy Dore, David Pakman. And within 2 days and like maybe 3 or 4 videos, I came across 2 substantially embarrassing stories about Trump that I did not hear a peep about from either Pool or Rubin or Carl Benjamin or any of them at all. Didn't hear anything about him. And so I continued to watch these left of center sources, and I would say my favorite by a landslide is Kyle Kalinske. I would frequently see them pointing out things that would embarrass the right and things that Tim Pool and Dave Rubin would never talk about. But meanwhile, it's like on Tim Pool or Dave Rubin, if like AOC had done something even half as embarrassing as the thing that was being pointed out about Trump on like sources like, Kyle Kalinske, Tim Pool would have made like at least one 20-minute ranting video about it, and he'd refer to it many times over the upcoming weeks. But when it's Trump, it's like you're lucky if he mentions it at all. And this is a bi-directional problem. It's like, Tim Pool and Dave Rubin will absolutely show you cases of conservatives owning the libs, but it's not like commentators on the left are going to show that anywhere remotely close to as much, if at all. But then there's also the exact inverse of this. And so I continued to watch videos from the left as well as from the right, just to like maintain that balance. And although my watching of Tim Pool and Dave Rubin has absolutely plummeted to like less than a tenth of what it used to be. So I say like Dave Rubin, now he is now explicitly on the right. And I can't help but feel that and the thing is, like I'm actually center right myself, as I've mentioned before, so it's not like I'm offended by people being on the right, like not at all. But I can't help but feel that a good chunk of him moving to the right is due to how much he has benefited financially and socially from moving in that direction. I do think his mind has genuinely changed in a lot of ways, but I don't think this is a simple matter of his mind honestly changing on these things. I get the impression that there is something strategic about what he's doing, or maybe he just wants to be part of a tribe, which makes sense. It feels a lot better to belong than to not. So I get that, but at the same time, it's like it's going to affect my trust levels and how unbiased he's going to be. Tim Pool can be considered, on the other hand, to be right of center by today's standards. But I wouldn't call him right wing, as he still has many opinions that are either moderate or left leaning. However, I will say that he gets at least as much satisfaction from criticizing the left as does any right wing commentator. His zeal for criticizing the left makes it very easy for many people to think that he's just flat out right wing. So it's like he's not like right wing like Dave Shapiro or Ben Shapiro, but he absolutely like loathes the left every bit as much as Shapiro does, and you can see it in everything he does. And relatedly, one person I want to give a shout out to is actually Sam Harris. Sam has been someone I've looked up to since around 2006, though he did recently greatly disappoint me in what he said in that infamous trigonometry interview on the Trump election, all that kind of stuff. Greatly disappointed in him. But what I will give him absolute credit for is that I have never seen someone so immune from audience capture as Sam Harris. I have been following him, as I said, for a very long time, and I have seen him do things that he knew would upset huge chunks of his audience, his base, and he did them anyway. The first I can think of was back in the atheist community around 2007 or 8 or something like that, at a major atheist conference, one of the biggest of the year. In his speech, he told the audience why he thinks we need to stop calling ourselves atheists. Because I won't go into the reasons why, but that got some blowback. And then he would often be talking about, the benefits of mindfulness meditation and kind of like a secular spirituality as a way of kind of getting to know your own mind better and become more wise. And a lot of atheists were iffy about this, or worse, because it just seemed just too religious to them. He did that. He spoke out against Islam, radical Islam, even though that was among the most risky things to speak out against. Then he did not take the side of the social justice left, which invites some very noisy enemies. He had Charles Murray on his podcast, and he's the co-author of The Bell Curve. And to be honest, in retrospect, I don't think he grilled Murray nearly enough. He didn't grill him at all. But I do have sympathy for Harris on that. I could talk about that later if it's desired, but I'll leave it for now. And then his strong position against Trump ended up alienating him from many of his post-social justice culture war fans who loved him because of his not buying into their narratives. And then there was what he just did on trigonometry. Say what you will about him, but you cannot say that he is being captured by his audience and just chasing clicks. And for all my few disagreements that I've had with him notwithstanding, I can't not respect that. But coming back from that brief diversion there, I'll say one other thing I'll talk about is it can be really interesting when you start following commentators of different politics than what you're used to. The first time I started doing this actually was back in 2013 or so. As I mentioned earlier in this video, I started watching some of the content of people like libertarians and so forth and conservatives. And it was interesting because the thing is that if I watched a Young Turks kind of program or whatever, a progressive, and I knew the issue they were talking about, I could predict their position with incredible accuracy. I knew the ideological script, right? That was not true nearly as much with conservatives, right? So it became much more interesting, right? Because you'd be like, oh, I didn't think of it that way before, and now actually the same thing is happening. I listen to Kyle Kulinski a little bit every day, and with him, it's I think I'm a little better at predicting his opinions than I was the people on the right before, because I did spend a lot of time on the left, and so I do remember the paths of thought. But still, Kyle Kulinski will surprise me significantly more than Tim Pool, which makes it a lot more interesting and informative and mind-broadening to follow. And I really do think that Kyle Kulinski is fantastic. I think he's the kind of guy that should be in any kind of intellectual dark web community, because one, he's about ideas, not the person who gives the ideas, so not identity politics. He's maximally pro free speech, and he does a great case of arguing for left-leaning populist positions. That's the kind of person, when you want to have a good debate between a libertarian and a well-informed progressive type, Kyle Kulinski is the kind of guy you want. So one straightforward lesson from this whole experience is that it's important to consume input commentary from the various angles of an issue, because each side is going to see things from different angles. They're going to foreground this and background that, set of facts or interpretations. Each will often make their perspective look maximally good and the other perspective look very bad. But if you consume it all, you can correct for this to a significant degree. The thing is that there's more than just two perspectives on most issues. You'll have establishment left, establishment right, social justice left, religious right, populist left, populist right, libertarian, socialist, moderate, on and on and on. Who has time to go reading all of those perspectives? And this is why, coming to the really big moral of this video, it's so important to have deep, genuine friendships, bonds with people of different perspectives than you. People who each one of you view each other as being a generally good person, a generally intelligent person, a generally honest person, and whose relationship is based on far more than just political discussion. And interacting with people outside of politics is so important, because if you're always interacting in the context of what you're disagreeing on, then it's super easy to start viewing the other person as stupid, evil, or ignorant. But if you see them acting in a variety of other contexts, like maybe they're a good teammate, they're very giving at your church, things like that. They're a good neighbor, they're a good coworker, they're honest, they always do what they say they're going to do. It gets a lot harder to write them off. And if you value the friendship and the relationship, that is like a huge incentive to maintain civility, charitability, like trying to interpret things in a way where it's like, is there a way, it sounds evil what they're saying, but is there a way that maybe this could look different from a different perspective, and not be evil? Like when you have a motivation to maintain a relationship, and when you actually know this person to be a very good person in like 17 other contexts, it's much easier to do that than when you're just talking to some anonymous person, online, where, both parties are hiding behind their keyboards. They have no existing relationship. The only way they know each other is through the current disagreement they're having. Like it's just, it breeds toxicity. And once you have this kind of friendship, like each member of the friendship could help balance out the other, right? Because, you start off with different perspectives. They're viewing the world maybe from one moral framework. You're viewing it from a moral framework that's not the exact same one. And because of that, we tend to like gravitate towards people that get us and who we get. And so like you're each probably disproportionately consuming different sources of news. And each source is going to be biased in favor of things that make their side look good and the other side look bad. And so it's very hard to just go watching like perspectives from all like regular coverage from all different perspectives. But let's say you have a friend who's very much into one of them that you're not. That person is someone who's going to be able to point out things to you that you are probably not going to see on the sources you follow, and vice versa. And so yeah, it has a balancing, broadening effect. So relevant to all this, I mentioned in a few previous episodes that I'm going to be doing a conversation with a person who I'm friends with in my church. He's a pro-life activist, and I'm pro-choice. And so we're going to have that talk on a podcast. And I may post the discussion on this channel too, but at the very least I'll link to it in an upcoming video. And this is going to be an example of two people who recognize each other as being decent, well-intending people, who disagree on something but recognize that there's more to us than that disagreement. And it's basically like, I'm pro-choice but I don't think he's a misogynist, and he's pro-life but he doesn't think that I'm some like callous baby-killing sociopath or something like that. So that's coming up. But I guess I'll just wrap up with saying that, I've gotten to the point now where it's like I've radically decreased my consumption of political news. And part of the reason for that, a big part, is because honestly, like, I don't really trust anybody. Every person that I've ever trusted has lived to disappoint me. Whether it be Cenk Uygur, Tim Pool, Dave Rubin, Jordan Peterson, every one of them. It's like right now, ironically, even though I'm right of center, the person that I actually give the most credence to is Kyle Kalinske and, Crystal Ball and Sager in Jetty on Breaking Points. But the thing is, at the same time, I'm just kind of waiting for them to live to disappoint me too, because everyone else has. And it's like, so I wanted to ask the audience, like, feel free to comment, like, are there any news sources that you have a good deal of trust in that you think are actually making a real effort to be balanced and not biased? If so, please say so in the comment section. Like, I sometimes wonder if maybe a big part of I can think of a few reasons why there aren't that many of them. One, it's just harder to look at things from various perspectives. That's one thing. Two, audience capture. You start catering to a certain audience, giving them fresh meat, giving them what they want to hear, they come back for more. That's another reason. But another thing is, I wonder if it's because of our natural inclination towards narratives. We seem to like drama. We seem to like situations where there's a good guy and there's a bad guy. There's good and there's evil. And it's a lot easier to have that kind of a story-like setting if you're mostly looking at the situation from one moral perspective and not going out of your way to be balanced. And so like I've heard, for example, one person recommended to me that I've consumed a little bit of is Matt Taibbi, and every bit of stuff that I've seen from him over the years I've respected greatly, and I've been told he's pretty balanced. But I wonder if almost like if you find that truly balanced person, does it get boring because you lose the narrative? I don't know. I hope that's not the case. But yeah, who do you trust? Who do you listen to? Who do you think is worth listening to? Next video coming up will be about why we start off often left-leaning and become more conservative as we get older. I will see you then.